Hi there, I'm Mora. My mom and sister planned a family ski trip without even telling me, then expected me to stay behind and babysit their kids. But worse than the betrayal was realizing this wasn't the first time they had quietly pushed me aside, making me feel like an outsider in my own family. Why would people who claim to love you make you feel so invisible? Before we dive into the story, tell me, have you ever felt left out by the people who were supposed to stand by you? What time are you watching this and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. I truly want to hear from you. And if this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, the fireplace snapping every so often as if trying to join the conversation. I sat at the long oak dining table, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of cider, the only anchor I had in a room that didn't seem to notice my silence. The plates clinked, laughter bounced between walls decorated with old Christmas ornaments, and conversations twisted around plans for an upcoming ski trip at Mountain Pines Resort. Jody was animated, already outlining which slopes she wanted to try, while Casey flipped through photos of their reserved cabin, all rustic wood and sweeping snowy views. I smiled when appropriate, nodded at the right times, pretending my stomach wasn't curling tighter with every word. It wasn't that they forgot to invite me. It was that they didn't plan to. When Mom finally turned to me with that too sweet voice, it wasn't to extend an invitation. "We were hoping you could do us a big favor, honey," she said, reaching out to touch my arm, a gesture so practiced it felt rehearsed. "Someone needs to stay behind and watch the kids." I blinked once, twice, waiting for the punchline that never came. No one else even paused. Dad nodded approvingly. Jody and Casey exchanged relieved looks. I wasn't part of the trip, I was part of the logistics. Something inside me, something small and stubborn, cracked a little. I set my cup down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the coaster like a lifeline. After dinner, Mom and the girls gathered around the living room, buzzing with energy. I stood back, arms crossed lightly, while they presented Mom with her birthday gift, a delicate gold necklace engraved with the names of her beloved family members. I edged closer, squinting through the dim light at the tiny charms. Jody, Casey, the grandkids, even Wayne and Lori, cousins I hadn't seen in months. Not me, not Mora. The absence wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. "Oh, Mora, would you mind taking a picture?" Casey chirped, thrusting her phone into my hand before I could speak. I positioned them carefully in front of the fireplace, the garlands twinkling above their heads. Through the lens, I saw my family, whole, glowing, laughing, without me. The shutter clicked once, twice. It sounded louder than it should have, like a door slamming shut somewhere deep inside. Later, while they dissected ski gear options and restaurant reservations, I slipped out onto the front porch. The cold bit through my sweater, slicing sharp and clean into my skin, my breath fogged in the brittle night air. I stared out at the driveway, where the family SUV sat half-packed for the trip. Snow was gathering slowly on its roof, a soft, indifferent layer, erasing the lines and edges. Maybe it wasn't just a misunderstanding. Maybe I was never meant to be part of their picture. Somewhere behind me, the laughter swelled again. I didn't turn around. The house looked different now that the laughter had faded. The faint crackle of the fire still filled the silence, but it sounded hollow, almost mocking. I sat stiffly at the edge of the couch, still holding the camera Casey had tossed at me earlier. The pictures were crisp, perfectly framed moments of a family I didn't quite belong to. Mom's face radiant with joy, Jody and Casey hugging her tightly, the kids piled into the shot with messy grins. Not once was I in the frame, not even by accident. It was strange how easily you could disappear from your own life, how quietly people could rearrange the table without your seat. The clock on the mantel ticked louder as the room emptied. Jody and Casey slipped away first, whispering about packing lists and winter coats. Dad pretended to doze off, but his foot tapped restlessly against the floor. And Mom watched me. She approached with the slow, deliberate steps she always used when she was about to say something she knew I wouldn't like. "You know, sweetheart," she began, her voice syrupy and warm, "it just makes sense. You're not tied down with kids or a husband like your sisters are. You have the flexibility. I knew what was coming. Still, I stayed silent. It would mean the world if you could help with the little ones during the trip, she said, her hand patting mine like I was already halfway to agreeing. You're so good with them, Mora, always have been, so dependable. I nodded because that's what was expected, but inside something shifted. Dependable. A word that had once sounded like a compliment now echoed like a sentence. I wondered absently when being reliable had become being invisible, when stepping up had become stepping aside, when helping had turned into disappearing. The snow outside had picked up, thickening into a quiet storm. Through the frost-laced window, the world looked soft, muted, like even the sky had given up protesting. I retreated to the kitchen, needing something, anything, to anchor myself. The photos still sat open on my phone. Each smiling face, each frozen moment without me, stared back with a kind of brutal finality. I scrolled through them slowly, feeling the familiar sting rise in my chest, the tightness behind my eyes. If duty was love, why did it feel so much like loneliness? The snow piled higher against the window, and I stayed there, silent, watching it bury the world I thought I knew. The ticking of the clock filled the empty spaces in my living room, each second dragging longer than the last. I sat on the edge of the sofa, my phone cradled loosely in my hand, staring blankly at the floor. The email notification had come through an hour ago, a neat, cheery subject line that read, "Kiddo schedule." I opened it once, closed it, and opened it again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. There it was, a full spreadsheet. Monday through Sunday, breakfast times, nap windows, snack preferences, bedtime rituals, all lined up like a prison sentence. No greeting, no would you mind, no thank you. Just an order disguised as helpfulness. My name wasn't even in the email body. It was assumed, expected, decided. The hum of the refrigerator kicking on startled me, pulling me from the daze. I reread the schedule again, slower this time. My chest tightened with every line item, every casual assumption that my life, my time, belonged to them. I didn't remember agreeing to this, maybe because they never asked. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. A message from Casey. I almost didn't check it. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't meant for me. It was a screenshot of their group chat, the one I wasn't included in, mistakenly sent to me. I stared at the screen, numb. Jody's message was right there, bold and casual. Hope Mora doesn't flake. If she does, well, it'll ruin everything, LOL. Followed by Casey's laughing emoji. I read it again, and again, as if repetition might soften the blow. They had already written the ending to this story. They had already assigned the villain. Before I even had the chance to open my mouth, I was branded unreliable, selfish, a ticking bomb waiting to destroy their perfect little plans. I put the phone down carefully on the table, like it might explode. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window, hollow and unfamiliar. The old self-blame stirred weakly in my gut, whispering, maybe if you'd done more, maybe if you'd said yes faster. But the whisper was weaker than before, drowned out by something fiercer, something heavier. Maybe it's not me that's the problem. Outside, the snowstorm gathered strength. Rattling against the windows like an impatient guest trying to be let inside, I sat there a while longer, listening to it howl, feeling the storm inside me finally start to match the one outside. The morning after the blizzard, the world outside looked smothered under a thick, colorless quilt. Every branch bowed with the weight of snow, every rooftop blurred into the sky. Inside my house, the air was no lighter. I sat at the kitchen table, mindlessly stirring cold coffee, when I made the mistake of opening my phone. There it was, Casey's latest post. Some people just love playing the victim during the holidays, it read, the words paired with a smiling selfie of her holding her son, both decked out in matching Christmas sweaters. The comments poured in like acid disguised as sugar. So much patience, Casey. Family is tough, but you're tougher. Some people don't appreciate what they have. Each notification hit like a slap, faster than I could process. My hands trembled around the phone. I could almost hear their voices, the ones that had once cheered me on, now clucking their tongues at the unseen villain they had crafted. Me. I set the phone down carefully as if it might bite. No one had spoken to me. No one had asked for my side. They hadn't needed to. A single narrative, whispered sweetly enough, could drown out 1,000 silent truths. I sat there breathing in the faint smell of old firewood, letting the betrayal sink deeper into my chest. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Mom stood there, bundled in her thick maroon coat, a tin of cookies clutched in gloved hands. "Hi, sweetheart," she chirped, stepping inside without waiting. Her boots tracked melting snow onto my worn rug. She placed the tin on the counter as if dropping off peace offerings. "You know," she said, her tone syrupy, "families sacrifice for each other. You're so strong, Mora. We just wish you understood how much we need you." There was no anger in her voice, no accusations, just the quiet, suffocating weight of obligation wrapped in faux affection. I smiled because I was supposed to. I nodded because it was expected. Inside, something frayed further, a thread snapping loose. She stayed just long enough to make it awkward, then left with a flurry of well-meaning goodbyes. The door clicked shut behind her, sealing me back into the cold hollow of my house. I picked up my phone again, a text from her blinking on the screen. Another reminder about the trip, another gentle nudge disguised as love. I hovered over the reply button, and then, slowly, deliberately, I hit delete. No apology, no explanation, no justification. The snow outside thickened, tapping against the windows like tiny fists. I sat there, watching it blur the world into a pale, featureless smear. Maybe silence isn't love. Maybe silence is surrender. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't ready to surrender anymore. The night air was sharper than usual, carrying the faint smell of cold metal and pine sap as I stepped onto Darlene's front porch. The Christmas lights blinked half-heartedly around the windows, a tired attempt to mask the tension inside. I hadn't wanted to come, but when Mom calls a family meeting, you show up. It's not a request, it's an expectation stitched deep into the fabric of our lives. Inside, the house was too warm, heavy with the mingled scents of sugar cookies and wood smoke. I kept my coat on, gripping the sleeves like armor as I hovered near the doorway. They were all there. Jody perched on the armrest of the sofa, grinning too brightly. Casey fidgeted on the love seat, thumbs scrolling her phone. Mom stood near the kitchen, arms crossed, watching me like I was a child being called in to explain herself. As the conversation flowed, plans, excitement, logistics, I noticed something different, the looks, the quiet comments from neighbors that filtered back to me in the days leading up to tonight. "Hope you're feeling better, Mora. Your mom's counting on you." "You know, it's so nice you're making time for family." I hadn't understood the undercurrent until now. Darlene had been busy, whispering, spreading half-truths with her careful hands, painting me as fragile, unstable, too delicate to pull my own weight. It wasn't just about staying behind anymore. It was about being pitied. And pitied people don't get invited. They get managed. A wave of shame burned through me so hot I thought I might actually sweat through my winter coat. I backed away from the conversation, pretending to study the snow building up against the porch rail. That's when I heard it. In the kitchen, Casey's voice, too loud, careless. "I just hope Mora doesn't ruin the surprise. After all, it's not really about Mom's birthday." I froze. Verna's voice answered, softer but clear enough. "Well, it is a big engagement party for Casey, isn't it?" Silence, and then laughter, soft, sly, the trip, the planning, the money, the sacrifices they were asking of me. It wasn't even for Mom. It was for Casey. I stepped back into the living room, the weight of the truth making my legs feel brittle. My sacrifice wasn't for love. It was for their convenience, their comfort, their celebration. The walls of the house seemed to bend inward, the garlands and twinkling lights blurring at the edges. I made it through the meeting. I smiled where needed. I nodded when expected. A marionette in a play where I hadn't even auditioned, but when I left, I didn't look back. I walked into the cold night, pulling my coat tighter around me. The sky was a heavy gray, snow swirling like smoke under the streetlights. At the curb, I paused, staring up at the house glowing with warmth I was never really part of. They never intended for me to be part of the celebration. My phone buzzed, a new text from Jody. "Don't forget to pick up extra snacks for the kids before Friday." Without hesitation, I pressed delete. The screen went dark. The snow crunched under my boots as I turned and walked away. the night swallowing me whole. The wind rattled against my windows, carrying the bite of the Oregon winter deeper into my bones. 2 days left. 2 days before they packed their bags, clinked their champagne glasses, celebrated everything they never even considered inviting me to be part of. I should have been numb by now. But betrayal, when layered slow and deliberate, never loses its sting. Sitting at my kitchen table, the lamp casting a dull pool of light over the scratched wood, I overheard Casey through the thin walls of our group call. She didn't realize I was still connected. "I can't believe Mom thinks it's still about her birthday," she giggled. "This whole trip is basically my engagement party." Someone laughed in the background. Jody, probably. The sound sent a cold, bitter ripple down my spine. So that was it. I wasn't just being left out. I was being used. Sacrificed for a celebration that wasn't even for the woman they pretended to honor. I pressed the end call button quietly. My hand shook slightly, but not from sadness, not anymore. Later that night, as the house creaked against the cold, I sat scrolling through my banking app. Routine, mindless, until my stomach flipped. A pending charge, $1,200. Mountain Pines Resort, booked under my name. My vision tunneled for a moment, rage crackling through the fog of my exhaustion. I hadn't authorized anything. I hadn't agreed to anything. The next morning, heart thudding painfully in my chest, I called Jody. I was calm, measured. "Hey," I said, my voice almost steady. "I saw the charge from Mountain Pines on my card. Did you?" There was a beat, then a laugh, light, airy. "Oh, that? It's no big deal, Mora. You weren't using that card anyway. We'll figure it out after the trip." No apology, no hesitation. As if my trust, my financial security, was just another thing to pluck from the shelf when it suited them. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. By noon, I had locked every account I owned, changed passwords, called the bank. Then I sat back at the kitchen table, the faint smell of burnt coffee from the morning's forgotten pot curling through the air. I opened my laptop, typed 2 words into the search bar: last-minute vacations. I didn't look at the snow piling outside. I didn't think about the text messages that would surely start coming when they realized. Let them wonder, let them scramble, let them feel a fraction of the helplessness they'd taught me to swallow. If they thought I was the reliable one, they were about to learn what happens when the foundation cracks. I booked a flight to Phoenix, 1 ticket, non-refundable, no return. Outside, the first heavy flake of the night landed on my windshield, melting instantly against the cold glass, a clean slate. The night before their big departure, the house groaned under the weight of the storm outside. Wind scraped the windows like impatient fingers. Inside, my world had already gone silent. The phone call with Jody echoed in my head, every word designed to twist the knife just a little deeper. "I think you're making a bigger deal out of it than it is," she said, breezy as always. "It's not like you needed that money anyway. Honestly, Mora, you're being so dramatic." For a moment, a sliver of doubt crept in. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was too sensitive. But then the cold truth returned, sharper than ever. This wasn't new. This was tradition. They gaslit me because it was easier than admitting they'd stepped over a line they always knew was there. I ended the call without another word. Later that night, I forced myself to go to a neighborhood holiday gathering. Pretending for a few more hours was easier than answering texts about why I hadn't shown up. The air inside the neighbor's living room was thick with spiced cider and the sugary scent of cinnamon candles. Twinkling lights wrapped every banister, every window frame. Laughter flowed freely, easy, unburdened. I stayed near the entryway, clutching a plastic cup I barely sipped from. Across the room, Casey held court. I watched her lean into a small circle of neighbors, her voice bright and biting. "Well, you know Mora," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear, "always too busy or too important to join in. You know how it is." The laughter that followed was instant, raw, and real. I felt it like a slap, not because it was unexpected, but because it wasn't. The story had traveled, not just within our family, but out into the streets and sidewalks and kitchens of this town. I wasn't just isolated anymore. I was labeled. I left the party without saying goodbye, my boots crunching against the thin layer of ice on the driveway. Sitting in my car, engine off, I stared through the windshield, the snow blurring the world outside into an unrecognizable mess. On my lap, my phone glowed softly. A one-way ticket to Phoenix. Booked, paid, confirmed. Departure, 7:15 a.m. The same morning they would be leaving for Mountain Pines. I tilted my head back against the seat, closing my eyes. Their trip would go on without me, but for the first time, I wouldn't be the one left holding the pieces. I won't be here when they look for someone to blame. A fat snowflake hit the glass, lingered for a second, then vanished into water. Tomorrow I would too. The morning the family was set to leave, Ben lay frozen under a thick white quilt. The streets were silent, the houses sunken under the heavy weight of fresh snow, as if the world itself was too exhausted to stir. I pulled my coat tighter as I trudged toward my mother's porch, a sealed envelope in my gloved hand, something she had asked me to drop off last minute. I had planned to leave it in the mailbox and walk away. No goodbyes, no second chances, but the door opened before I could turn. Lori's son, barely 5, barreled toward me, cheeks pink with cold, eyes wide and guileless. He grinned, reaching for my hand. "Are you staying behind because you're bad?" he asked, tilting his head in innocent curiosity. The words hit harder than any carefully crafted insult could have. Simple, pure, undeniably honest. I smiled, a small, stiff thing that didn't touch my eyes, and ruffled his hair gently before handing off the envelope. Inside, the house buzzed with excitement. Luggage lined the hallway, boots thudded against hardwood, voices called back and forth with last-minute reminders. It smelled of coffee and cinnamon and endings. I turned to leave, but Mom caught me. "Wait. Mora, could you help me grab the gift bags from the dining room?" she said, breathless, waving a hand. I followed numbly, and that's when I saw it. A stack of papers sat askew on the dining table, half tucked under a pile of bills. On top, a printed email, slightly crumpled but perfectly readable. It was a thread between Mom and Dad. Subject: Mora, planning notes. I skimmed without meaning to, the words jumping out like ice water down my spine. She's always been the fallback, reliable, no complaints, shouldn't be an issue. No gratitude, no affection, just cold logistics. I dropped the envelope I was carrying. It landed with a soft, final thud. The weight of it all, the expectation, the betrayal, the casualness of it, pressed down until I felt hollow inside, scraped clean. I made it out of the house without another word. Outside, the air bit harder than before, slashing against my face, needling through my coat. I gripped the fabric tighter, my fingers numb from more than just the cold. Across the street, the family SUV idled in the driveway, exhaust curling into the frigid morning air. Inside, they laughed, loud, carefree, whole. I stood there, invisible as ever, watching the people who once called me theirs drive away with everything they needed, leaving behind everything they didn't. I looked down at the ticket in my hand, one way to Phoenix, tucked safely in my pocket. I squeezed it, grounding myself in the one choice that still belonged to me. They chose their comfort. I choose my freedom. I turned from the house without glancing back. The flight touched down just as the Arizona sun broke over the low mountains, spilling golden light across the runway. I stepped out into a different kind of cold, dry, crisp, unfamiliar, and pulled my bag tighter against my shoulder. In the cab ride to my rented apartment, I watched the scenery blur past, flat stretches of desert, clusters of cacti standing stubborn against the wind, houses baked in dusty earth tones. Everything looked stretched wide under the pale winter sky, like a place where starting over wasn't just possible, it was expected. Inside the small apartment, the air smelled clean, untouched. I dropped my bags at the door, kicked off my shoes, and let my bare feet sink into the cool tile. The silence wasn't heavy here. It didn't press down or remind me of what was missing. It just was. The coffee machine sputtered to life as I stood barefoot, watching it work without rushing it along. No buzzing phone, no urgent voices, no expectations. On the kitchen table sat my laptop, still closed from when I'd booked my ticket. A small part of me wanted to ignore it, but closure, even messy and incomplete, needed acknowledgement. I opened the file I'd found before I left, hit play. Their voices filled the room, casual, unbothered, Darlene laughing about how Mora would stay behind without a fuss, Russell agreeing, she's always been the fallback plan, reliable Mora. The words stung less than I expected, not because they didn't matter, but because I finally understood. They weren't speaking about me. They were speaking about the version of me they needed to exist, the one who gave without question, stayed without asking why. I closed the file. For a moment, my hand hovered over the keyboard, the old urge to send it to everyone, to prove something, to vindicate myself, rising like a bitter tide. But I didn't. Instead, I deleted the recording, letting it slip away into digital nothingness. Revenge wasn't the victory, survival was. I stepped onto the small balcony, the metal railing cold against my palms. The desert stretched out before me, vast and raw and humming with a quiet kind of freedom. The hurt was still there, a low thrum in my chest, but it didn't anchor me anymore. It simply existed like the scars on my knees from childhood falls, reminders of where I'd been, not chains binding me to where I'd stayed. Some things you don't carry with you, some things you bury to make room for who you're becoming. I closed my eyes against the sun, breathing in the thin, clean air. Tomorrow would come, and this time it would be mine. Sometimes walking away isn't about giving up. It's about choosing yourself for the very first time. For too long, I let guilt dress itself up as loyalty, mistaking silence for love. But healing, real healing, begins when we recognize that we are not obligated to stay where we are diminished. If you're carrying weight that was never yours to bear, maybe today is the day you put it down. Maybe today is the day you choose peace over approval, freedom over familiarity. Have you ever had to make a choice like that? I'd love to hear your story. Tell me in the comments, where are you from and what was the moment you chose yourself? If you found this video touching or it spoke to something inside you, drop a 1 inch in the comments or just say hello and share your thoughts. And if you didn't connect with it, I'd still love to know why. Your voice matters here. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more heartfelt stories like this one. Thank you for being part of this journey.